Okay, everybody, I think that we're about set here, just going live just a couple seconds early, so hopefully this is helpful for you, and I really want to apologize for the late notice about the live stream. I do try to do these live streams on Tuesday evening, and if you're watching this after the fact and it's not live for you right now, I'm sorry about that. I just wasn't able to get out the notice earlier today. Was pretty busy getting a lot of other things done. Not that that's an excuse, but that's just an explanation for tonight's kind of late notice on the live stream. And there's a couple things I want to make sure that I go over while we're having the live stream today. I do want to make sure that if you're going to ask me a question, try to do the at We the Govern, just so it's easier for me to spot it. A lot of times there's a lot of commentary in the comment section here. When that happens, it's a little bit harder for me to come over here and spot the question, and it's a little bit easier for me to spot it if you start out with something like that. So the one thing I wanted to mention is that I actually did just a handful of videos today. One of those videos just launched. It launched like 15 minutes ago, and it was because that was how fast my video guy and we were able to get it just recorded and done and launched. And I did that because it really was very time sensitive. It had to do with a cheap gas event going on in Kent. And the reason why I think this is funny, and the video will explain it if you go to my video section there, it's actually the Shell, Jackson's Shell gas station, I believe. And it's right off of 167 in Kent, if you're familiar at all with that area. It's kind of around the corner from Tractor Supply. I just know because I've stopped at Tractor Supply to buy stuff for my animals in the past. So it's a pretty easy to find, centrally located place there in Kent. And they're selling gas tomorrow for $3.82. The reason why they picked that amount is that that's the average amount that you're paying for gas in other states, not Washington. And so that's cheaper than Costco. That's cheaper even than the Auburn Walmart. Somebody pointed out that the Auburn Walmart is probably one of the cheaper gas stations around. But this was just a way to show for a few hours you can come by and buy gas for your vehicle at a lot less than what you're going to be paying normally in Washington state. And it's to highlight the problems with Inslee's carbon tax scheme that, of course, is a gas tax, but they're trying to lie about preventing it from being known that it's a gas tax, even though everybody knows that it is. And also just the high taxes in general that Washington state imposes on the gas, even though, and frankly, they spend a lot of it on other things other than roads. So it's just a nice event. I'm going to see if I can stop by there tomorrow. I happen to be up in that area anyway, so I just had found out about it because they just made this announcement. This event was actually sponsored by Project 42, as well as Americans for Prosperity. It looks like they joined together on this event, which I assume means that, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming it means they subsidize the gas costs for the gas station for some period of time, and then all these people can come by and get cheap gas. I do know there will be people, I'm sure, collecting signatures for, I just had a bunch of these signature sheets from volunteers turned in here, but it's this I-2117, which is Stop the Hidden Gas Tax. So that initiative is people are collecting signatures for it now, and it's a logical place to collect the signatures for any place that somebody wants to pay less tax for their gas than they currently do. So that event's going on tomorrow. That was why I launched this other video kind of really just before this live stream took off. So that's kind of an unusual schedule for me, just launching the videos. But I also did a couple other videos, and I want to talk about what those are. And I guess there's some benefit if you log on to the live stream, you get a bit of a sense of what's going on and what I've been up to over the last couple days. There was one question that somebody had mentioned last time about where was I going to, because I do go out and do a lot of events in the public. I'm just not sitting behind a video camera just trying to record videos. I actually spend more time doing stuff in the public than I do actually on video work. But the gas tax event tomorrow, I'm going to try to be there. So if you are there and you happen to be there while I am, come on up, say hi. I'm going to try to do maybe a quick little live stream while I'm there. I haven't done very many of those recently, so it'll be a little bit of an experiment for me while I'm there. The second thing is on Monday, September 18th, so a little less than a week from now, I'm going to be at the Firmly Planted Resource Center in Vancouver, Washington. It's a homeschool research center. They're doing an event, kind of one of their launches that they're doing there next Monday, and right now I'm kind of on the schedule to speak. I'm not 100% sure what I'll be covering there, and regardless, it was generous of them to invite me to be there. I'm happy to be able to speak in an event like that, and I'm happy to talk to anybody who happens to be in Vancouver. If you are and you want to come by and see the Firmly Planted Homeschool Resource Center, come on by and feel free to come up and introduce yourself to me. We can chat, and I'm happy to meet people who watch my videos out in public. It's always an honor for me to be able to do that, and it feels a little weird because I never really think of myself as a YouTube guy, but I really it's kind of a humbling experience. So I'm always happy to see people who are actually watching these videos. The other event that's coming up here is Saturday, September 23rd in the evening. I know I'm going to be the MC for the Cowlitz County Lincoln Day Dinner, the Cowlitz County Republican Lincoln Day Dinner. I'm actually didn't write down the exact venue, but I'm sure you can find that if you go to their website or their Facebook page. And I will be there as the MC. Just from my experience in the past, it's a little hard for me to, when I'm the MC, I'm usually pretty busy at these events. I do MC a number of Lincoln Day dinner events like that around the state, so I'm always happy to hop in and do that. And I'm honored that the Kitsap or that the Cowlitz County Republicans have asked me to do that here. But if you happen to come and you're already there, come on up to me, talk to me before or after the event, and maybe there'll be windows of time during the event that we can chat. And happy to talk more. I know there's a number of events I have coming up in October. Yesterday, which was Monday, I did a presentation up in Bremerton to the Seebeck Women's Republican Club up there, and that was a great venue. Had a little PowerPoint presentation talking about the importance of citizen engagement and civic activity and just general activism, and I'm hopeful that that was encouraging to some of them. Just a great group of people up there. I always like coming to Bremerton, so if you want me, and I believe that there's going to be some follow-up too. I do a lot of training for activists, so if you have small groups of people in your community and you want to meet with, have me come and do training for you, I'm happy to do that. Help people with Public Records Act, filing PDC complaints, doing research, organizing local groups focused on trying to change the way that government is operating today in your community. The other one that I wanted to mention here as well, I did another video today, which will probably launch later on in the week. Actually, there's two other videos that I was able to produce really quickly. One I'm going to try to launch as quick as I can, which is actually about the Yakima mayor calling 911, trying to silence and call the police on people who are gathering signatures outside of Walmart. In fact, signatures like the ones I've collected here from volunteers. Apparently she was so upset that far-right signature gatherers, how dare they, come out and gather signatures to reduce taxes. And she is a Democrat. When she ran for office, actually, she was sponsored by the Democrat Party as well as an anti-gun group and SEIU. Those three groups kind of tend to travel in circles with each other, and so she was one of their sponsored candidates. She was actually originally elected to the Yakima City Council, and then the council recently voted to have her be mayor. It's kind of a weak mayor system out there. She was a licensed masseuse and has a degree in mass communications, which makes her perfectly qualified to be mayor of Yakima, of course, and also particularly frustrated and angry that anybody dares to collect signature for something that she doesn't support in the city of Yakima. And it was funny because a 911 operator really was schooling her on the fact that it wasn't illegal and there's nothing the police can do about it. It's the public accommodation law that if you have an entity like Walmart or others and they're allowing groups to come out there, they can't then selectively say, well, I like your initiative, I'll let you collect signatures here, but I'm not going to let this one come here and collect signatures, for example. So it's a problem. I don't expect local elected officials to be very educated on the law, even though they enforce and impose all kinds of ridiculous laws on us. They're some of the most ignorant people you'll ever find. And unfortunately, that's particularly true when you have somebody like this who is obviously hyper-partisan and a bad choice for Yakima, but clearly she doesn't want anybody to be collecting signatures in her community if they're going to be cutting taxes. So, and of course they have to be far-right signature gatherers, of course, if they're trying to cut taxes there. So I did a little video on that, and I played the 911 call in the video, so you can listen to it yourself. There'll be a transcript attached to that video, and I always think it's good to cover local stories like that. The other one that I did do had to do with the New Mexico governor's kind of the mask coming off of the the petty tyrants that get elected to office, and of course the New Mexico governor Gresham with their recent decision to suspend the federal Constitution, your Second Amendment rights, of course, and then also claim that her oath of office doesn't, that's not an absolute thing either. I mean, it was really an absurd example of a politician kind of pulling back their mask and revealing themselves for the tyrant that they really are. And I guess I point out in the video this, and I think it's worth reiterating, that if you as an elected official who does take a sworn oath to uphold the Constitution, usually of your state and the federal Constitution both, and I believe New Mexico has similar Second Amendment right protections, just like Washington State does, that if you've decided that you've taken that oath and then you decide there's some excuse for you deciding to eliminate constitutional protections, even if it's supposedly temporary in your community, if you're willing to do that for Second Amendment rights, then what's to prevent you from doing it to First Amendment rights or Fourth Amendment rights or 13th Amendment rights? I mean, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in America today, and what's to prevent the New Mexico governor from deciding that slavery is okay for some period of time again, or maybe forever, if she can just suspend the Constitution willy-nilly like that. Now, a lot of Democrats have distanced themselves from the New Mexico governor recently after she made this announcement. And some of them, of course, still like her policy. They just don't like the way that she announced it. But really, I think most of them, if they're distancing themselves from her, it's mostly not because they disagree with the policy. They're distancing themselves from her because she said the quiet part out loud, right? She was actually willing to say what all of them tell each other when they're in their wine and cheese club meetings, or when they don't think the public's watching and they don't believe really that you and I have constitutional protections, or at least that there's all kinds of ways that they can take away those constitutional protections given the opportunity or excuse, whatever excuse they can find. In her case, they had rising crime rates in New Mexico, and so she wants to take away people's ability to defend themselves. That's logical to a Democrat, apparently, and of course it's consistent with what billionaires like Bloomberg or others who fund anti-gun initiatives, anti-self-defense initiatives, that's what they like. They want, apparently, to have more victims out there, and they certainly don't want you to have the right to defend yourself. But you don't often see politicians, especially at a governor level, reveal who they really are. And so that's when we talk about the mask slipping off. This is a great example of a governor really revealing the true person that she is. Now, it may very well be that she's a complete clown and an idiot and, dumb as a box of rocks. That's not uncommon. That's oftentimes seems to be the profile of people that we elect to office in these positions. The Peter Principles in full display, the worst people we can find seem to get into political office. But even with that level of incompetence, somewhere around her, there's probably somebody that has some level of intelligence who was fully aware that this is completely illegal, and somebody who has a law degree, or at least pretends like they do, should have at least told her that it was completely and absolutely illegal. And again, I have to reiterate this. If you, as an elected official, believe that you can just suspend one part of the Constitution openly and just say that it doesn't apply anymore for some period of time, or maybe forever, then you can do the same thing to the others. So again, I am not familiar with any elected Democrats in this country who are willing to bring back slavery, but there's nothing now that, if this is allowed to stand, that would prevent then just your next Democrat elected governor to say, listen, I liked it when the Democrats controlled the South in the past. Why don't I just abolish the 13th Amendment, and slavery is going to be legal for some period of time. Just temporary, right? So it's just, anyway, it's just a ridiculous and absurd situation. At the same time, sometimes we should be thankful for the incompetence and the stupidity and the corruption that becomes exposed so openly when a politician does something like this. And so for that, I want to thank the New Mexico governor for, like I said, pulling off the mask and revealing herself and her inner tyrant coming out. We always knew it was there, but at least now it's fully exposed. So that's very helpful. And it looks like, Jason, I jumped ahead on your question here because you were asking about thoughts on New Mexico governor suspending open and concealed carry guns in Albuquerque. And yeah, I already did the video. So I don't know if the video come out. It really depends on some of the editing. I'm hoping that it comes out in the next couple days. I'll try to launch it by this weekend for sure. It's just so ridiculous. Anyway, I just thought that was very funny. And Bobby, you had a question. Or no, this isn't a question really. You just said that somebody did that last weekend to a guy at a Spokane, Washington Walmart. I'm assuming that means that somebody harassed or threatened a signature gatherer at a Spokane, Washington Walmart. And by the way, this is an interesting thing. When the left goes out and collects signatures, they aren't harassed. If it's a policy that is endorsed or supported by the left, conveniently they get very little harassment for doing so. It's just how things operate in this state, and the Democrats seem to accept that. They think that that's perfectly fine. If it's something they want, then they defend the rights of signature gatherers. But then if it's something they don't want, then suddenly the signature gatherers have no rights to collect those signatures, which is very, very fun. And it's very classic, right? So that's the kind of thing that we do see all over. It's important to highlight, a lot of times like this Yakima mayor, you usually don't get people who are so openly ignorant about it calling in 911, especially when her own police department had already put out a formal statement saying that we're not going to kick people out because you need a court order to do that, and they're not going to go in and do that. And the public accommodation law, again, has been pretty well established. Although this mayor of Yakima may have been born yesterday, the truth is people have been collecting signatures in our state since 1912, and they've been collecting them outside of stores. They've been collecting them outside of all kinds of places. There are some limitations on where you can collect signatures, but particularly if it's a public venue that you've been allowing people to come in and do things at, if you're letting Girl Scouts sell cookies or Boy Scouts sell popcorn. And listen, I've had kids that were doing both before. If you have a venue that does that and allows that, then they're going to have to allow signature gathering there as well. So it's been the law for a long time. But again, you always have them angry because there is nothing greater, no greater sin to people in government than having citizens dare to want the government to get less taxes. And so I just think that's pretty funny. Let's see. Okay, so here's a question then. How long before, this two people actually asked the same question here, Jack and Jason, different variations on the same question. How long till Inslee declares the same emergency like Governor Gresham down in New Mexico? My guess is, Inslee's probably watching what's happening down there, and I'm not sure that's actually the pile that he wants to step in right now. He might. Inslee's not a bright guy. Nobody's ever accused him of thinking for himself, and so maybe he has somebody around him who's decided, hey, listen, this is your last hurrah, so go ahead and go out and do something really stupid. Inslee's mask, of course, fell off long ago during COVID, as did the mask fell off for a lot of politicians during the COVID lockdown theater. So, and Inslee definitely displayed the fact that he was willing to suspend almost all civil liberties and freedoms given an excuse and opportunity to do so. That being said, a lot of things have kind of started to roll back some of those attitudes and decisions, especially as the truth comes out more now, more often than not about, for instance, the recent story that came out with the CIA, a CIA insider, whistleblower, talking about how they were paying off experts to change their assessment of the origin of the COVID leak, for the COVID virus leak out of China. That should be a bombshell in a normal setting, to have people coming out and exposing that. Or the ivermectin stories now that are coming out where the CDC basically knowingly, willfully, and with malice lied about the therapeutic effects of ivermectin. And so they purposely were willing to go out and just falsify the data and lie about it, knowingly, willfully lying, and firing doctors for it. I had a friend of mine that wanted to be prescribed ivermectin out in South Dakota. And the doctor who was there was from Japan originally. And so he said, sure, we do this all the time. It's not terribly unusual. Ivermectin was actually discovered in Japan, so they have one of the longest histories of using it in the population, and it's used for a lot of different reasons. And so the doctor was getting ready to prescribe it, and the medical institution that he was at threatened him to kick him out of the country, remove his ability to practice medicine in America, and everything else over that. I mean, there was insane things that were going on during COVID. And there's always a lag effect between when the worst behavior is committed and when a lot of the insider sources or information starts to come out, as it's coming out now. The censorship that we all knew was going on, for instance, has become a lot more public lately. As emails reveal, from Twitter and elsewhere, and insiders in these places are suddenly coming out and admitting that they're being told to censor you and I, and videos like this probably, and stories like this, and articles for sure that don't conform to the narrative that the government wants us to have. There's a question here from Jason about why is the Seattle media obsessed? Seattle officer laughing on body cam. Don't they have more important things to cover like crime? And the answer to that's a good question, but let's address what the media in Seattle doesn't want to cover crime. They want to conceal crime. In fact, the media, the Seattle Times, certainly the Stranger and the Seattle Times are hard to tell the difference between the two of them. The only real difference now, because a lot of former Stranger journalists are actually working at the Seattle Times now, and that's why you can't really tell the difference between the two of them. The Stranger uses a lot more profanity, but the Seattle Times is basically the same thing. And then King 5, Cairo News, Como News, all these guys now, generally, they're all functioning mostly as public information officers for whatever the government's policies are. Every now and then you'll have a journalist who might stray a little bit off that defined reservation in which they're supposed to stay. But for the most part, that's how they're approaching things. They don't want to report on crime. They want to pretend like it's not happening. There's a lot of pressure on the Seattle Police Department to downplay the crime stats. And so the Seattle media is going to mostly cover it up. And so one of the best things that they can do if they're trying to cover up crime or pretend like it's not happening is to deflect and focus on something that's just a distraction. This is the same thing that happens to us, the national news. There's a lot of times stories, and conservative media will do this too, right? Well, you'll obsess and be distracted about a conservative story that's funny or interesting, but it's a distraction from the main story that's going on right there. And I think that happens a lot. And that's what the Seattle media is doing right now. There's a lot. It's hard to find good things to talk about when you have a massive drug addiction problem, especially in Seattle, going on right now, when they're kind of moving the homeless camps around, but oftentimes shoving them inside so that it's not as visible sometimes on the street, but it's going to be inside these buildings that if they don't burn them down quickly, they're certainly going to become toxic meth labs very quickly. And so they don't really want to talk about the escalating crime that's clearly occurring in Seattle. And we've been here before. I mean, crime has been worse in the past. I realize that people aren't always able to put that in the historical context that it deserves because we're talking several decades now. But as somebody who lived in New York City, for example, pre-Giuliani, I remember what it was like to have 2,200 people murdered in 1 year around me. And New York City's not even close to that yet. It's escalating, of course. The crime is greatly increased there, and it'll eventually get there at the trajectory that they're at right now. But right now, the media is recognizing that they need to conceal the truth about crime statistics and pretend that it's not happening or look the other way or try to suppress it or threaten the police department with sanctions of some kind if they actually report the truth. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that's going. And that's why the Seattle media is so obsessed with that, with a laughing police officer. And I think that was something seriously taken out of context. If you've ever been around law enforcement, and I've gone on ride-alongs before myself, I actually think that's a good thing if you're civically engaged and want and have any desire to be interested in what's going on in your community. A ride-along with law enforcement locally is very beneficial and enlightening. My son, for a while, was an explorer with the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. I think that was a really good experience for him to have. I think he's kind of decided that he's not going to go down the law enforcement path as a career, but it was an excellent experience for him to have, develop a lot more respect for people in law enforcement and what they have to go through to enforce the law and to be in that position. And it made quite an impact on them in a good way, I think. And I think citizens who live in the community, you should do this. You should be more familiar with what law enforcement's doing in your community. Ride-alongs are a great way to do that. You're not going to have many of these leftists in Seattle want to do that because they seem to primarily be on the side of criminals, and they would prefer if criminals were left alone and let them go out and commit more crimes. They seem to like that. And to some extent, there's this policy, this is just going back and repeating the same mistakes from the 50s and 60s about rehabilitation questions on violent criminals. The studies in the past that have been done over and over again show that the vast majority of crimes are committed by a small percentage of people. This is the way it is. This is the way it always has been. I don't know why that's a surprise or something unique or new. Sociology classes at the colleges today, of course, are garbage mostly, and so they try to conceal this truth. But it's very obvious if you've ever bothered to do any work at all studying the nature of crime. The logic then behind the 3 strikes and you're out approach, that Washington State being one of the first states to take this approach in the early 1990s as a citizens initiative, because of course the legislature was too cowardly to do it themselves. That approach to dealing with crime was logical because it was recognizing that, listen, if you got a prolific criminal here, if we put them away, we may not be able to rehabilitate them because it may not be possible to rehabilitate them, but at least we can protect the community for the length of time in which they are incarcerated. That is a completely forgotten part of why it is that we're putting these people in jail. So that's why you have people like Thurston County Superior Court Judge Zip, who's decided that she loves it when violent criminals are stuck right back into the community with no bail and already out on other warrants, just sticking it right back in, letting them commit more terrible crimes and create more victims. Judge Zip in Thurston County wants more victims. That's clearly, I don't know any other conclusion you can come to from the actions that she's taken, and she's not alone. Most of the judges in King County are that way. A good percentage of the judges in Snohomish County. Most of the judges don't think you're immune if you're in Eastern Washington. And of course, this stupid idea tends to infect most of the judges elsewhere. So even in places like Idaho or in Montana or in Wyoming or in South Dakota, you're seeing this creep into the way the judges are approaching prolific criminals, and it's a terrible mistake. I've oftentimes argued in the past that you want to make sure that you're not over-criminalizing the code. I think there's truth to that. You don't want to be creating all kinds of new victimless sort of crimes you can put people in prison for. Parading without a permit, for example, that's kind of foolish to put people in prison for 20 years for that. But of course, the Democrats love that idea. But at the same time, for those who are genuinely committing what would be widely recognized as terrible crimes, rape, violence, theft, assault, home invasion, things like this, obvious terrible crimes that require you to be hurting other people and to doing terrible things, those people should be going to prison, and they should stay there. And some of them, if they can't, by their actions, if they can't change the direction they're going, they should be in prison for life. People like that should be. Let's see. I saw there's a question about. Oh, here, Bobby had a question about where I see property taxes going. My landlord pays $7,000 a year, and did you hear about the $200 billion extra dollars found in the public school system in 2022? So here's the thing: government. Property taxes are one of the ways that Washington collects money, right? Most of the property taxes that are collected in Washington State, not all of them, but a good percentage of them, I believe it's about 58% roughly on your property, technically goes to the school system. Some of it goes to the state, and it gets filtered there through the state back to the school system based on the population of the student body in your local school system. And then some of it, of course, gets siphoned out by OSPI and the bureaucrats who are basically doing very little in that building in downtown Olympia. But then some of it's also direct levies that the school has lobbied for, and technically it's not the school, but usually a lot of people, the union has lobbied for it, usually local people have lobbied, and they said, okay, we want either levies to augment the amount of money that we put into our local school system because we want something extra, we want a better sports system, art system, program, whatever they've sold that they want in the local community. And then there's also bonds, which are costs that are actually legally supposed to be separated from levies, and this has to do with the cost of buildings and building new buildings and things like that. And usually bonds are really debt financing, so they're gonna raise enough money to pay on the bonds for as long as the bonds exist for those Taj Mahal new fancy school buildings that they're putting in. So you have that. That's a big chunk of actually your property taxes, the majority of it. About 11%, usually depending on where you live in the state, goes to your local government, which includes law enforcement and the justice system. The courts, typically, that's roughly what it is. And then little slices come off of that for the conservation district, for your fire department, parks department, if you were foolish enough to set up an independent entity like that, and other types of taxing entities. That's how your property taxes get split. So when you look at it, how much can the state directly affect your property taxes? Well, they have an underlying amount that they can collect, that they can change, but it's going to directly impact how much money goes to the schools. And there's a lot of lobbying that goes on to the schools. Now, right now, you're paying more for public education, and you're getting a lower quality product than has ever been delivered in the past, at least based on any kind of metric that would be used to determine skill set, knowledge, or anything else related to schools. There's no doubt that they're doing worse than ever. I think that schools today have fancier sports programs than ever before. I think that the buildings are nicer than they've ever been. I think teachers are paid more than they've ever been, and of course you have more bureaucrats than you've ever had in the public school system. So that's what your taxes are going to go towards. Inevitably, you'll see some kind of a tax revolt that will occur, but it's going to end up having to hit all these other there's a lot of special interests that are kind of living off of that tax revenue, and that'll be the fight when that day comes. And it probably is coming sooner rather than later. There's going to be a fight over that, and it'll be probably knocked down and drag out. TZ, you got a question here about the Cary Lake one in Maricopa County down in Arizona, the signature matching process, yeah. And so they have to use voter registration only. How does Washington State verify signatures? Well, assuming, okay, so how does Washington State verify signatures? So technically, Washington State, the state auditor's office, has the signature on file, and they are theoretically matching the signature that comes in at the local auditor, 39 counties, each auditor, and in King County, it's the director of elections in that department. They're matching the signature there to whatever they have on file. Now, a lot of times what they have on file is really just coming out of the Department of Licensing because of motor voter laws and collection of voter registration stuff tends to come from there. But lately, with some of the changes in the law, some of the voter registrations are actually coming from all over the place. They're going to be coming from pretty much every agency in Washington State has technically been set up towards collecting or getting people to be registered as voters. And so those agencies are going to be collecting those signatures. So technically, that's where the signature match comes from. Obviously, if you're familiar with these systems, you know that the signature match program is significantly flawed, frequently is unequal. I've talked to plenty of election observers that have had to step in and intervene when an employee at a county was just passing through every single signature match, whether it matched or not. And others sitting right next to him were very strict. And so you'd have these disparate sort of results and disparate outcomes in how they were doing signature matching. Because at the end of the day, they may be using clear ballot systems or whatever, and they're pulling out those signatures. But a lot of times, it's a decision made by a person who's been trained, quote unquote trained, sitting there, and so it's sort of arbitrary. It's not a great system for tracking it. And of course, if you're familiar with the left right now, they want to eliminate even that as an element of the auditing process or validation process for votes. And if they do eliminate it, then I think that's probably the end of mail-in voting. I don't know if people realize that, and the left seems to think that they can get away with having this without any kind of matching system. But if they do eliminate that, I think that ultimately that's the final domino in ending signature matching. And so this push by the left, I'm just not totally sure that they see where that's going to go, but we'll see. There's a question here from Jason. Question, what are your thoughts on Seattle police kicking out the consent decree after 12 years and $200 million later? Well, I mean, obviously the Seattle Police Department, Seattle PD, have been under consent decree for quite some time. And the consent decree simply means the feds are essentially monitoring that police department to make sure that they're doing the right thing, and based on whatever the complaints or problems that they said they had when they started it in the past. 12 years is a long time. It seems to me that they should be out of that consent decree. To retain it is pointless and probably just a waste of money, but there is nobody in the Seattle government who minds wasting money on nothing, so I'm sure that they'll probably keep pushing it that way. Anyway, so it's just kind of silly. Aloha, Mom, you had a question here. Will there be any signature gatherers at the Puyallup Fair? And if so, which building? Thank you for all you do. And the answer to that is yes. I was actually just at the Puyallup Fair with my kids. I was there, I think it was Saturday, so a week ago Saturday. I believe that was September 2nd. But so I was there, and there were signature gatherers inside where it's right where the Republican booth is located. I saw a bunch of people collecting signatures there. I also saw they had a special booth outside that I don't know if it's permanent, but it's by the Green Gate. Where it looked like Let's Go, well, I don't know if it's Let's Go Washington, but it was one of these other groups that was collecting a lot of signatures for the initiatives. The ones I have sitting here are just our volunteers that have just turned some in today. But some of these other groups that are out there collecting signatures on this project, I mean, there were really big piles of signatures they were gathering. If you have not signed the initiatives and you're going to the Puyallup Fair, take a few minutes, run by, sign all 6 of them. I think it's a great idea. I support these initiatives, and so should you if you want government to be a little bit better. It's not a perfect utopian solution to all the world's problems, but it does fix a few small problems that we have here locally. And I think demonstrating that we can do this is actually pretty important. Let's see. There's a question. There's a question here, Chris. Let's see. The Fed and states never had any kind of taxes prior to 1913 income tax. They raised revenue by other means. Bonds, levies are more taxation without representation, and then the assessor raises the taxes. Well, Chris, that's not actually true at the state level for sure. Mostly the feds operated with excise taxes, which I think were less intrusive, so that part's true, but not at the state level. The state actually, our state anyway, Washington State, has actually had, they used to actually have a, what do they call it, polling tax that was very unpopular with Washington State residents, and they rebelled against it, and they eventually eliminated it. The legislature was forced to eliminate it. Also, in Washington State, before 1913, they did have property taxes that they were collecting for many years, and there is actually a frequent. In fact, the reason why they added the initiative process to Washington State's Constitution in 1912 was when it was added. The reason why they did that was actually as a pushback against taxes that Washington State had. So I think you should go back and do a little bit more homework when you talk about that, or at least be more specific. These types of taxes of some kind, have been around for a long time. And it's, the question usually is, especially when you're dealing with tax policy, is what is it that you want government to do? What is it that the people really want government to do? And then how do you afford to pay for it? So user fees are unpopular usually, even though that's probably the most rational way of paying for specific types of policies. Another thing that people don't realize in Washington State in particular is that, like many of the western states that were created, large areas of natural resources like timber, renewable resources like timber, were set aside specifically so that as they were harvested, that money could go into the schools and cover the cost of building new buildings, for example, things like that. The environmentalists were angry about that, of course, and they don't want us to cover the cost of schools, and so they've done everything they can actually to restrict the ability of the state to use those lands through Department of Natural Resources for that or any other purpose, and making it so that you can't actually cover the cost of schools. And that's been unfortunate, because if it had been managed correctly, a lot of the costs that are put into property taxes today probably wouldn't be there in the way they are. At the same time, the argument typically is the left will say, okay, well, income or sales tax is terrible because it's regressive in the sense that poor people pay a higher percentage of their income on sales tax than they do on other types of taxes. And that's true, but at least you can control sales tax. You can control sales tax. So if you want to pay less sales tax, you can buy fewer things. The other practical reality, even though it's sort of illegal, is that if you have a state near you, right, you could go to Oregon, which I'm sure nobody watching this video has ever done, and buy something without sales tax and carry it over the border. You're not supposed to do that, but I'm sure people do it more often than not. So you really want to have the lowest taxes that you can to deliver the government, the policies that you need. Support the justice system, jails, law enforcement. Why do you want to support those things? Because otherwise then all you have is a vendetta world where basically people are going full vigilante and there's no rule of law of any kind at all. So supposedly you want that. You want a rule of law. And so therefore you need to be able to fund that. And if you're going to be able to fund that, you're going to have taxes. Well, the problem is, and the reason why you have such ridiculous taxes now is that a huge portion of Washington state and many states, budget is squandering waste of money that just gets flushed down the drain on stupid things and bureaucracies that are unnecessary, overpaid, undervalued, mostly harmful. In fact, some of them really doing nothing but hurting everybody in the state. And the nature of bureaucracy is to perpetuate itself. So, of course, they're going to always take more money, more money. They're never satisfied. The world doesn't have enough money to keep them going. So that's how it goes. Let's see. There's a lot of, does the Arsenio, you got a question. Do you think Thurston County Sheriff approach on smash and grab will not be challenged by AG Ferguson or other Dems? I don't know. I mean, I think the Thurston County Sheriff, the newly elected sheriff, and to be fair, I actually supported John Snaza, who he defeated, but he seems to have been taking a pretty serious approach to dealing with crime and chasing criminals down and getting them, and arresting them. Now, I don't believe that he's adequately supported by the prosecutor, and even worse than our prosecutor in Thurston County is actually the judges. Some of the judges seem bound and determined to unleash the most violent criminals they can back into the community with no bonds, no jail time, nothing, and that is a big problem and it needs to be addressed. So will Ferguson challenge him? Maybe, but I'm not sure if Ferguson's going to do that right now while he's trying to run for governor. That would probably look bad for him. So it may not be Ferguson. It may be the next AG, whoever comes after Ferguson, if it's a Democrat. The Arsenio, same person, does the GOP have a chance at winning the gubernatorial election next year? Sure, they have a chance. That still requires Republicans to be competent in running political campaigns, which is a massive mountain to summit. And it requires probably a unified recognition that whichever option comes through in the general, there will be a dominant Democrat. Right now, Ferguson seems to be that leader. Franz is seeming to peter out a little bit. She doesn't seem to be fundraising. And maybe somebody bribed her behind the scenes, I don't know. But one way or another, if it's Ferguson that comes together, it'll be whoever the other alternative is. And if it's Byrd, if it's Reichert, whoever it is, there has to be general recognition that you better get behind that person to keep, the heart of darkness, Bob Ferguson, out of that office. So the GOP would have to demonstrate a level of skill and organization and unity to do that. And of course, it isn't just the GOP. It's going to be a lot of independents. Washington State doesn't register by a political party. And parties have always been weak in Washington State. This goes back almost 100 years now. Even though a lot of Republicans have won office in this state over the years, the general party affiliation, there's been a strong resistance going back, again, a long, long time, at party affiliation. People want the ability to be independent or to vote for different parties, and they don't want to be pigeonholed into one party, which is kind of an interesting dynamic in the state. So if you're going to run for office, you're going to have to be able to cross over and get a lot of people to vote for you, who might sometimes vote for other people, right? Ferguson's got such negative numbers. I'm sure that he's aware of the polling as much as anybody else is. And at some point in time, you have to realize that there's something going on there. Jason, question, what's your thoughts on Illinois State Police aggressively expanding the semi-auto ban to ban parts and accessories? Will this increase the chance of it getting struck down? I do think that it will. That's a great question. I mean, the Illinois Police Department, Illinois is another one of those states, right? That's just, if you've ever seen a state that should be separated, Chicago should be its own state, and the rest of Illinois should be their own state because they're totally separate. But anyway, yeah, it's a terrible, tone-deaf, and absurd overreaction. Those same police are totally unwilling to enforce address the terrible crime problem that they have in the Democrat-run city of Chicago, which has more people shot every day just by their terrible crime. I mean, anybody who's ever been around Chicago knows it's been bad, but it's just continually getting worse right now, and they keep electing these just horrific people in charge. I can't imagine what it'd be like to be law enforcement in that kind of a place. Tommy, you have a question here about what do you think will happen for 2024 governor election. I personally support Sammy Byrd, but if he wins, what do you think will happen? Well, again, I already kind of talked a little bit about the governor election. It's hard for me to exactly see where things are going right now. We're still early days on that. We're over a year away. There's a number of things that can happen between now and then, of course. And if Sammy Byrd got elected, well, I'll tell you one thing. That would be an earthquake in this state. It would shock the system. I can't even begin to explain how the political elite in this state would probably freak out. And the bureaucracy at all levels would probably start to come up with ways to try to block whatever policies that he would want to bring into the state. The same is true with Reichert. People who think that because it's Reichert somehow the bureaucracy would react differently are insane. They clearly have no idea how the bureaucracy actually works in the state. So they would immediately work to sabotage anybody that's a Republican that would come in as governor. So if you were a Republican governor to be elected, whether it's Sammy Byrd or Reichert, doesn't matter, or just anybody who doesn't have a D next to their name, if you have a D next to your name, you've already sold your soul. So you've already been bought off. So if you don't, then you're going to be an outsider, and now you're coming in to take over the governor's office, which hasn't had anybody with a different letter next to their name than D since 1984, I believe, and that's a nightmare. It's difficult. You're going to have this massive, corrupt agencies that don't want anybody to know how bad it really is. And one of the best things you could do is fire a lot of senior bureaucrats, probably almost every one of them. Anybody in that top 2 level, you'd have to fire them all. There's nothing to salvage there. The Peter Principle's been on display in Washington for a long time, so some of the worst and most incompetent and corrupt and dishonest people tend to rise to the top in those agencies. So you want to get rid of them just right off the bat. None of them are probably salvageable. You might have a couple of exceptions, but let them reapply. And then you're going to have to end some agencies entirely and modify some of the structure and how some of these agencies are set up. So a major housekeeping is needed, and it's massive, and it needs to be widespread, and you're going to get a lot of resistance. So that's just what you have to do is keep working on it. Here's a question from Jason. What are your thoughts on leaked emails of Patty Kruger and Ferguson waiting to make us register and store our guns at a gun club? Wanting to make us register? Well, Patty Kruger, who seems to be a relative of Freddy Krueger, if I remember right, that person is, and of course Ferguson. Listen, these are bad people, and so I'm sure that they are always going to try to find ways that in their fevered dreams that they're going to come up with some ways of restricting and taking away your freedoms and gun rights and free speech rights or your right to property or anything else. That's what they do. They don't think you and I are the little peasants that exist out here. They don't even like the fact they have to be elected. They think that they should just be occupy those offices and that none of us should dare question or even wonder what they're doing. That is kind of their attitude. So I don't know how to address those specific emails directly. I want to read up on some of those emails, maybe do a video on it, because Ferguson himself there's just been a lot of bad stories coming out about him, more than normal. You have to realize the volume of stories that are negative coming out about Ferguson, it just keeps implying to me that there's some other Democrats that are trying to change the field in the way things are going, because Republicans are mostly too incompetent and disorganized and certainly never have a plan to win. And so when I see this kind of endless repeating of these stories and problems that are coming out about Ferguson and his incredibly low popularity numbers, that tends to indicate there's some kind of infighting going on the Democrat side, and it's somebody's willing to undermine him. I mean, Ferguson destroys public records all the time, so it's fast. I mean, he's been fined now for it multiple times. The state, of course, has been fined. Ferguson never has to pay a price for it. He just makes them destroy records or hide them from us, and then when they get in trouble, you and I get to pay for it. So anyway, that's how it works. But I'd like to know what that fight is that's going on, and I think Ferguson is, of course, the worst person I can imagine putting in the governor's office. So getting those emails out is always worthwhile. I do think that if you look at the video that is coming out shortly, I think I'm interested in people's feedback. I put this 911 call in from this Yakima mayor. She was crazy, and it's just funny to hear the panic that she has about people daring to exercise their rights to collect signatures. So it's good to see them panic about something like that. And also that same exact person, you know that she's going to come around tomorrow and justify the worst behavior she can find in the community and pretend like it's not a problem. So anyway, I just think that's kind of absurd. But it is important, I think, to look at what these people say and what they'll do, particularly when when they get into office. Let's see, T.Z. Burton saying, I don't think Reichert will be any different than Ferguson. He is establishment. Yeah, Reichert's certainly going to be an establishment Republican, which is still going to be quite a bit different than Ferguson. I mean, somebody's not paying attention to how insane and crazy Ferguson is. It's not good. I memean, he really is a bad guy. And he has Ferguson's just one of those people, right? There's a moral vacuum, It's not that, he's going to do whatever he feels like he needs to do to be the tyrant that he is. And Inslee's kind of set this bad standard, too, of running 3 terms. Washington State's typically not had 3-term governors. And so for a governor as bad as Inslee was, to do 3 terms in a row sets Ferguson up for this mentality of, hey, if Inslee did 3, I can do 3. So, and Ferguson did 3 terms as AG. So I'm sure that's Ferguson's plan. Reichert would be a lot different than Ferguson. If no other reason, then different people would be hired. Would Byrd be more impactful in Olympia than Reichert? I feel like he would be, but either one of them would be substantially different than Ferguson. I think people have to just place some of this stuff into more realistic context of where we're really at. There's a lot going on in the state. One of the other things I didn't really mention earlier, and I do encourage you to look this up, on the PDC, Public Disclosure Commission enforcement page, you'll see that I have filed roughly about 100 PDC complaints over the last couple months. And I've been pretty busy. There's some that haven't posted yet, so you may not see them all, but there's a good percentage of them there up right now. I'm going to catch up, and there's a bunch more I still have to file of people who've broken the campaign finance laws. It's the WA, right? It's the Jackson Legacy Fund. It's the SEIU. It's a lot of these Democrat parties around the state, a lot of weird PACs, a lot of levy committees, some Seattle politicians. There's quite a few, actually, that I hit in those filings. And I have a lot more about those complaints coming up. I've actually filed so many that it'd be impossible for me to actually, even in this video or even in a live stream here, really go through and explain them all. But it might be worth talking about some of them next time. And just like I mentioned last time, I told you I'd come in here and have a list of a couple places that I'm going to be speaking at later on over the next couple weeks. I'll see if I can bring in maybe do a quick little video just about some of these other complaints that I filed, and some of them are fairly significant, and just to see so you get a sense of where they're at. I filed so many that really I'm just now starting to get some responses from some of the people that I caught breaking the law. Mostly it's doing a lot of things like vanishing funds out of their political committee or having money suddenly appear into it that's unaccounted for. Super late reporting where they hide a bunch of information. They wait till after the election to reveal what they did. Sometimes it's taking illegal over-limit anonymous contributions. Whatcom County Democrats did that, for example. The good example of somebody that's missing or vanishing funds all the time is the Skamania County Democrats. I don't know why the Skamania County Democrats were doing it. It was kind of weird, but I've never really looked at them before, but they had a lot of problems. And so anyway, that's the... those are things that I've been covering, and there's so many of them. I have some ethics complaints that I need to catch up on and file, and more PDC complaints. Probably, I think my current draft right now, I have drafted, or at least kind of documented when I've done my initial skimming, where it looks like I'll probably be converting them into complaints on about another 50 or so that I'm aware of, which probably means there's another 100 out there. I just haven't dug deep enough to get them all in. I'm just trying to get them in now so that the PDC can process them over the next few months. And I'm trying to improve the quality. I've had some typos in some of these that always annoy me because I am templating some of the complaints. And I modify them so much sometimes that the templates aren't always the best ones, and I have to be careful reading it through. I'm usually doing these complaints in between something else, so sometimes I miss something in between. There's a question here about from I'm assuming that's Wizard, IDRI, Wizard. Do you believe voting should be compulsory? No, I really don't. And what's interesting is if you look at Australia, which has compulsory voting, I don't think that necessarily produces a better outcome in who the people are that are elected. But, you know, it'd be interesting. I just don't see that being a positive thing if we tried to do that here. And then what happens if you don't vote? So you get fined or something happens to you, and then you have all these arguments about how I did vote, and my ballot got lost, right, or whatever, and then is that a good defense? I don't know. I mean, I don't, at the rate, the percentage of participation in the voting right now, and I say this participation because unlike the state auditors, I've actually spent time trying to look at the voter rolls, and there are a lot of problems with the voter rolls right now. So I actually don't know that we know for sure what the voter participation truly is, but it seems to be pretty high considering the situation that we're in right now. So I don't know making it higher is going to improve the outcome. It might. I'd be curious to see if you could implement that on a county level and see if there's changes in how the election process gets, how it gets completed. It'd be interesting. Let's see, Jason, do you think any of the federal or state gun ban challenges succeed, or will the case in Illinois be more successful? Well, I think that ultimately, if I was going to challenge any kind of constitutional challenge right now, especially if you're in a state like Washington, where the judges in our state are really terrible people. I mean, they really shouldn't be in office at all. Federal challenges are going to do better. It's not a guarantee. But the other thing is quality of the team that you put on these cases is more likely. If you have good quality, you're going to be more likely to have a better outcome. There are big differences between legal teams that are weak and half-assed, and they don't think through what they're doing, and teams that are actually serious and capable and knowledgeable, and they know how to bring in enough people that the individual expertise, the attorneys meld together into a pretty good, capable activity, and they're able to deal with not just the process of walking through the court rules and going through the appellate process and eventually going to hopefully the Supreme Court if it's a good case, but not screwing up so badly that what they actually do is create bad case law. So bad attorneys and bad lawsuits oftentimes create terrible case law. And so I would just want to make sure that they do a better job. So whoever's the best, federal cases I think are more likely to have longer lasting impacts. Let's see. Thanks. Let's see. There's a question here. I hope I'm right about Riker too. Again, listen, the election's a long ways away. The primary isn't it's just slightly less than a year away right now. The primary determines who the final two are on the ballot. And there's a lot of things that happen between now and then. You have these long election cycles, and they drag out, and it's frustrating, I'm sure, but it tends to sort out people and their ability to run a campaign. Let's see. There's another question here. In your opinion, would it be beneficial to the country to require voter participation in local elections before their federal votes are counted? Oh, man, I don't even know how you'd be able to implement that. And that just sounds so coercive to me. Listen, here's the thing. There are people, because of their belief system, that don't participate in the election process. I believe it's Jehovah's Witness, for example. It's against their religion to participate politically at all, in any way at all. Now, presumably, they still pay taxes, so I think you could argue that they're not really following their religion, but they won't vote. They won't vote at all. I've doorbelled many people who are Jehovah's Witness actually over the year and talked to them, and I believe there's a couple other religions that are maybe a little bit smaller, but they're known for just not participating in the election process. It's self-destructive, right? But what are you going to do? Like, come up and tell those people you're going to violate their religion? That's ridiculous. You can't do that. And so this, you're creating rules and more ways to punish people for not following those rules. I would be satisfied if we had elections that were more transparent and open. And the Democrats, without exception now in Washington State, have just pushed for policies to make them less transparent, less open. There's always something wrong when people are doing that. And so I think that's kind of important here. Let's see. Jason, you got a question here. Do you think the Washington gun ban was a Bruin response bill, like a temper tantrum bill to grab as much as they can, and this was not written to just ban the most unusual guns? I think one of the challenges with how the left has tended to approach guns is it's mostly an elitist behavior. So super wealthy people organize these anti-gun efforts, and they have for decades now, ever since the 60s when the first real strong efforts in the country were made to genuinely restrict people's access to firearms in the Second Amendment. Mostly it's these super wealthy elitists that push these efforts. And so there's not a popular movement to do it. They just create these big, well-paid, subsidized, funded groups to come out and push campaigns that, and then they want to take any kind of crisis and try to use that as their excuse to take away your freedoms. They really want to use this as like a template for how to take away your freedoms in other areas too. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile. You cannot trust a bureaucrat. You cannot trust government to protect your rights unless you're really being vigilant, and yet that's what they're supposed to do, is protect your individual rights. Instead, what they do is they protect their own fiefdoms and their own bureaucracy. And I think the gun bills are part of this, right? And it's something that we really, really have to watch. We just really have to deal with. I want to point out here, I've been going for about an hour. I'm trying to hold these live streams to about an hour. I want to thank everybody who did log on and give me your feedback on these. Sometimes live stream is a different format, and I like the interaction. I kind of like this, I think, second only to being able to go and actually meet you in person and see you at events. But as a method of communication, this is kind of the second best. I think one of the benefits I'll try to make sure I have with all these is I'll tell you about the videos I produce before they launch and some of the other stories that are coming out before they're public. So at least you feel like you're getting some information like that and being willing to log on here. I appreciate the questions. I like more variety. You had some really good questions here about tax policy and some fairly specific issues relating to local issues in Seattle with crime and just some of these other questions here. Jason, you're definitely making me want to go look up those emails, so I want to make sure I miss that. But I hope that you find this helpful and useful. Feel free to share it with others, and feel free to give me any feedback on what I can do better, and I will try to do a better job moving forward. I hope you like this new studio setup. I'm kind of liking this program right now, the way that the studio's moving here, and as always, I appreciate you guys for being here, and thank you for your support. Don't forget to tell others to subscribe to We the Governed, and just remember, as always, the future belongs to those who show up, and it's more than just showing up here asking me questions. It's showing up and getting involved in your local government to make an impact there. I'm sure that most of them won't want to see you, which is a good indication that you should be there. So with that, we'll see you next week, probably at the same time, probably 5:30, even if I'm late getting this out there. I just want people to know about it. And I will see you then, and good luck.